On a hot summer day on a deserted road in Texas, a passing couple noticed a pit bull lying motionless on the side of the road. The dog's body was covered in wounds and dirt. A man named James got out of his car and cautiously approached the dog. The pit bull raised its head and whimpered softly but flatly refused to get up. When James tried to pick the dog up, he growled and turned his head toward the ditch by the road. What James saw in the ditch made his heart sink with horror. The sun hung high over the wide, empty stretch of rural Texas road as James guided their SUV through the heat waves rising from the asphalt. Lisa scrolled through a map on her phone, their voices quiet with the contentment of a long-awaited vacation. It was supposed to be a simple drive, a peaceful break from the noise of their routine lives. But on a bend just past a sagging fence and a dusty field, James hit the brakes. Something was lying near the shoulder, a large dog, motionless and alone. They pulled over. From the window, Lisa could see the animal more clearly. A pit bull coated in dust, barely breathing. James stepped out first, cautiously approaching with one hand extended. As he got closer, the smell of blood and dirt thickened in the air. The dog's side was heaving shallowly, its ribs visible beneath torn skin. Flies buzzed around dried blood and dirt-caked fur. The animal opened its eyes, barely, and gave a weak, rattling whine. James crouched beside the dog, avoiding sudden movements. Up close, the wounds were worse than they had appeared. Deep gashes on the shoulder and flank, one paw twisted at an unnatural angle. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl. It looked not at James, but past him toward the roadside ditch, ice-fixed and filled with something between fear and urgency. James followed the gaze but saw only tall grass at first, then a shallow slope into a dark drainage trench. The pit bull refused to move. James tried gently lifting it, but the dog growled weakly and shifted its weight protectively, still staring at the ditch. It wasn't trying to escape. It was staying. Guarding. James stepped away, glancing at Lisa, who now stood behind him, her hand over her mouth. The dog let out a long, broken whimper, as if pleading for someone to understand. James knelt again and carefully peered over the edge of the trench. At first, it looked like a bundle of cloth. Then he realized what he was seeing: a small, unmoving child's body. He scrambled down the incline and shouted back to Lisa. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, was lying on her side, arms tucked under her. Dirt streaked her pale face and her hair was matted with leaves. Her chest barely moved. He checked for a pulse. Faint. Still alive. He called to Lisa, who was already dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The girl had scratches and bruises, her dress torn at the shoulder. She must have fallen or been thrown. James couldn't tell. The only clear thing was that she had been lying there for hours, maybe longer. And no one would have seen her from the road. They gave the dispatcher their location. Lisa's voice broke more than once as she described the girl's condition. James removed his jacket and gently laid it over the child's small body. She didn't stir. Nearby, the pit bull attempted to drag itself forward, front legs digging into the dirt, hind legs nearly useless. Its eyes never left the girl. James ran up to the road, grabbed the dog's collar gently and helped steady it as it continued to inch toward the ditch. The sight was unbearable, its body trembling from pain, yet it kept going. It stopped just short of the edge, collapsed on its side again, and let out a low, mournful sound. James knelt beside it and placed a hand on its head. The dog wasn't just hurt. It had stayed. It had waited. It had refused to leave her side. The sound of sirens pierced the stillness of the empty road, a surreal contrast to the rural quiet that had surrounded them moments before. The paramedics rushed to the ditch with their gear, gently lifting the unconscious girl onto a stretcher. Her pulse was weak but present, her skin pale under the streaks of dirt. As they carried her to the ambulance, James and Lisa watched in stunned silence, unable to process the scene they'd stumbled into. The pit bull, barely able to move, let out a soft whine as the stretcher passed by, his eyes following the child as if to make sure she was truly safe. Animal control officers arrived shortly after, crouching near the injured dog with a catch pole and heavy gloves. James intervened quickly, urging them to be gentle. The dog didn't resist. He was too weak, too broken. He simply looked up at James, eyes glassy but calm, as if acknowledging the end of his duty. They loaded him into the back of a small transport vehicle and took him to the nearest veterinary clinic. Later that evening, the vet informed James that the dog's condition was critical. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, signs of blunt trauma. They weren't sure if he would survive the night. As night fell, James sat in the clinic waiting room while Lisa made phone calls, trying to learn anything about the girl. No local alerts had been issued. No news reports, no missing persons bulletins, no one claiming a lost child. It was as if she had appeared from nowhere. That silence unsettled James more than anything else. He couldn't shake the image of the dog lying broken but watchful beside her, refusing to leave. It didn't feel like a coincidence. Something was wrong. The next morning, police met with James at the clinic. They had reviewed the preliminary report and were forming their own theory. The injuries on the girl could have come from a dog attack, they said. It wasn't unheard of. The Pitbull, large and powerful, fit the profile. There was no collar, no microchip. No evidence he belonged to anyone. They told James that if the dog recovered enough, he would be euthanized. It was protocol. Liability. James tried to protest, but their tone was final. To them, the case was closed. James left the clinic with a sick feeling in his stomach. Something about the story didn't fit. He kept thinking about the way the dog had stayed by the ditch, how he had tried to crawl back to the girl. That wasn't the behavior of an attacker. That was the behavior of a guardian. He decided he couldn't let it go. While Lisa went to check on the girl's condition at the hospital, James returned to the roadside where they'd found her. He walked the area carefully, retracing his steps, studying the surroundings. Not far from the ditch, hidden behind a dense thicket, he noticed something odd: fresh tire tracks leading into a narrow clearing. Following them, he found an old, beat-up sedan abandoned in the brush. The windows were shattered and the passenger door hung open. Inside were candy wrappers, a child's jacket, and what looked like blood on the seat. Nearby, in the dirt, were signs of a struggle: drag marks, torn fabric, footprints too large for a child. His heart pounded as he took photos with his phone, documenting everything. James brought the photos and GPS coordinates to the sheriff's office. A detective reviewed the images carefully, his face tightening with concern. An hour later, crime scene techs arrived at the location James had marked. What they found matched his suspicions. It appeared the girl had been taken by force and had somehow escaped. The dog had fought back. From the blood splatter, the wounds, and the broken leash found near the car, they pieced together what had likely happened. The Pitbull had attacked the kidnappers, allowing the girl to flee, but had been badly beaten in the process. Despite the evidence, the officers remained cautious. It was a complicated story, messy, incomplete. They still had no idea who the girl was or how she'd ended up there. James felt the weight of their skepticism like a stone in his chest. They didn't want to be wrong. Admitting the dog had been a hero meant they'd almost euthanized a savior. Still, he refused to back down. He continued to press the case, speaking to reporters, sharing what he had found. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. And somewhere in the clinic, the Pitbull kept breathing, barely waiting for the truth to catch up. James drove for miles, retracing their original route, scanning every roadside business with visible security cameras. At a withered gas station 10 minutes from the scene, he spotted an old surveillance system mounted under the awning. He entered the store and calmly explained what had happened, asking the manager if he could review the footage from the previous day. The clerk hesitated, then agreed. Together, they watched the grainy footage on a small monitor. The timestamp matched. James leaned closer. There it was, a beat-up van pulling into the lot, a man getting out with a girl who seemed nervous. Another man waited inside. Then, fast-forwarding a few minutes, James saw the girl trying to run, the struggle, and finally the Pitbull charging into the frame, teeth bared, latching onto one of the men before being struck and thrown aside. James brought the footage to the sheriff's department. This time, the reaction was different. The officers reviewed the video in silence. Their skepticism faded with each passing frame. Within hours, a warrant was issued. The van was traced to a rural property less than 30 miles away. Inside, they found the two suspects, along with more evidence of planned abductions. The story unraveled quickly after that. One of the men confessed during questioning. He admitted they had tried to kidnap the girl, but the dog had attacked them, buying her enough time to escape. The Pitbull, they learned, had belonged to the girl's family but had been missing for weeks after slipping out during a storm. At the hospital, the little girl slowly regained consciousness. Her mother clutched her hand, whispering reassurances. When the nurses asked if she remembered anything, she nodded and weakly spoke. She remembered the van, the struggle, and the moment she thought it was all over until her dog came running. She had called his name, barely able to speak, and he had come, just like he always did when she was scared. She described how he stood between her and the men, barking and biting, never giving up. When she escaped and fell into the ditch, he had stayed by her side until help came. The doctors and staff listened in stunned silence. There was no doubt anymore. The news spread quickly. Local reporters arrived at the clinic where the Pitbull was still recovering. They dubbed him hero and the name stuck. Flowers and letters began arriving, cards from schoolchildren, donations from strangers, food and blankets. People came just to sit near his cage and thank him. James visited every day, often with Lisa. The dog, though weak, wagged his tail when James entered. His body was healing, but his spirit had never broken. The clinic staff cared for him with gentle hands and reverent voices, aware they were nursing a legend. A week later, the town hall hosted a public ceremony. Residents gathered in the square, holding signs and candles. The mayor presented a special medal for bravery and honor usually reserved for humans. Hero was carried to the stage, his legs still too weak, his bandages visible. The crowd erupted in applause. Children clapped. Elderly neighbors wiped their eyes. The mayor knelt beside him and pinned the medal to a small blue vest they had made just for him. It read, "Protector. Survivor. Hero." That evening, James and Lisa sat in the same room as the girl's family, surrounded by warmth and gratitude. Her parents embraced them again and again, thanking them not just for stopping but for not giving up. Hero lay on a thick blanket between them, the girl's tiny fingers stroking his ear. She had insisted on being there, despite her exhaustion. The doctors allowed it, moved by the bond that words couldn't explain. James looked around the room, then down at the dog who had changed everything. He reached out and gently scratched behind Hero's neck, whispering a silent promise. In the days that followed, James and Lisa made a decision. They began working with the local clinic that had treated Hero, offering to fund equipment upgrades and sponsor care for abused and injured animals. They organized fundraisers, spoke to community groups, and helped launch a new outreach program focused on rehabilitation and rescue. They named it Hero's Hope in honor of the dog who had reminded them and an entire town what courage looked like. Months passed. Hero fully recovered, his fur growing back over old scars. The girl, too, regained her strength. The bond between them deepened with every visit, every nap curled together on the couch, every walk through the yard. Hero returned to his rightful home, no longer a stray or a mystery but a protector and beloved companion. In the heart of the town, a mural was painted, a child's hand resting on the head of a brindle pit bull with watchful eyes. Below it, a simple line, "He never left her side." James often walked by that mural, coffee in hand, and paused to look. Each time, he felt the same swelling in his chest. Not because he had been a part of something extraordinary, but because he had witnessed the kind of loyalty that defied explanation. And in that loyalty he found something sacred. Something worth protecting. Something worth remembering. Months after that sweltering road in Texas, James was still revisiting those events in his mind, the eyes full of pain, the body that refused to leave until the child was rescued. He couldn't forget how society had initially rejected the pit bull, blaming him blindly, and how that very dog had been the one who hadn't hesitated, but simply defended. He began visiting the vet clinic often, first for Hero, then for others. What started as a thank you turned into a calling. He left his old job and took a job helping where he had only sympathized before. Something in him broke, and then he put it back together again. He could no longer be the same. Sometimes he sat next to Hero, stroked his head, and thought how strange everything was. One nameless dog with a broken mouth and bloody paws was everything to someone. A savior. A friend. Family. James didn't believe in miracles. Until that day. Now he just believed in his heart and followed it.